Kính chào quý vị khán giả của đài VIETV Canada. Welcome to Political Talk with James Nguyen. Today we are honored to have Ms. Judy Scroll, Member of Parliament for the riding of Humber River Black Creek, as our guest. On today's show, we will discuss a variety of topics, including Prime Minister Trudeau's recent trip to APEC, at the APEC summit in Vietnam. Some of the accomplishments of the government since taking office in the last 2 years, and what are some of the goals and visions that the government has for 2018 and beyond?
Great, thank you very much, James. It's very nice to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So the first question I have is that what were some of the goals of Prime Minister Trudeau with the recent visit, with the recent APEC summit that he attended in Da Nang, Vietnam?
The opportunity to actually meet with the President, the Premier, the leaders of all of the different political parties, talk to them about Canada, the opportunities there are in Canada for investment, immigration, cultural exchanges, and very importantly the CPTPP program.
Right.
That as it moves forward provides a great opportunity for us to have broader export-imports between our countries.
Right.
I think we see very frequently in the stores, you'll see an awful lot of products from Vietnam today.
Yes.
And we would like to see more, but we would also like to see Canadian products have that opportunity to be shared with the Vietnamese as well. Yeah. So it was an opportunity for a conversation between our two countries. Mutual respect. We have a large Vietnamese population in Canada.
That's right.
They're doing extremely well. They really lead when it comes to entrepreneurs. And so we want to make sure that they know we want an ongoing discourse between the two countries. And as well as to pass on the condolences for the tragedy with the typhoon that went through yes. Vietnam. I think that shows you the need for changes when it comes to climate change.
Correct.
And no one country can do it alone, but if we're all committed to improving the environment for all of us, maybe we'll have far less hurricanes and typhoons that are causing such destruction and loss of life.
Yes. Now, while Prime Minister Trudeau was at the APEC summit, were there any agreements or bilateral or trilateral trade pacts that the Canadian government signed with any particular countries?
There were a lot of discussions,
okay.
And that's where it all starts. Getting to know each other on these visits is really important. The Prime Minister spent 2 days prior to the APEC conference meeting with business people, the university. They met with 10 or 20, I think it was, of young people at the university talking about human rights okay. and issues like that. So he did not shy away from anything. He met with whatever business people that they were able to arrange meetings with, right. as well as with the younger generation and what some of their concerns were in and around, of course, the sensitivity of human rights and trade agreements and how we should move forward in a collateral way that respects the human rights at the same time as we go forward.
Within the Vietnamese Canadian community, we're very the issues of human and labor rights in Vietnam are very important, and you, of all people, I'm sure very well aware of that. Was there a particular activist or groups of individuals that Prime Minister Trudeau met or talked to raise those concerns in Vietnam?
Very often, James, when these kinds of visits are happening, a lot of work goes on behind the scenes.
Okay.
And when it comes to the human rights issues in particular, because of the sensitivity, because of the desire to have a conversation, if you want to make progressive change and have progressive trade, as our Prime Minister talks about all the time, yes. you need to be able to have that respect for each other in that conversation. So I think the issue is not to embarrass a country Correct. About some of the issues that we don't agree with.
Yes.
But certainly when you have the opportunity quietly, and there's many of those quiet conversations within government officials,
yes.
to be able to raise certain particular cases possibly,
right.
but the overall issue that as Vietnam grows and moves forward in the world, you need the respect of the world.
Yes.
And in order to have the respect of the world, you need to be respecting human rights and people's right to freedom of speech,
Yes.
as well as your ability to be respectful of each other.
Well, we certainly hope the Vietnamese Canadians, we understand that we have to do trade with many countries, including Vietnam, and we hope that the government continues to raise any issues respectfully, quietly, diplomatically, so that, you know, things get done. But I want to just jump back a little bit on the TPP question. As you know, President Donald Trump has insisted that he will withdraw from the TPP. How would that affect the future of TPP if the biggest trading partner in Canada or the biggest economy withdraws from the TPP?
Well, certainly it would have an impact. There's no question about it. But there are lots of other trade agreements and lots of other opportunities. So whatever Mr. Trump chooses to do will be up to him, and he has to analyze the impact and the opportunities. But we will continue to move forward in as many ways as possible to ensure that we have trade going and that we are opening the doors for trade on both sides, from Canada as well.
Yeah, okay. Now let's talk more domestic stuff here, right? So since being in power 2 years ago, the Trudeau government, what are some of the accomplishments that you would say that, you know, Prime Minister Trudeau or the Liberals promised, and some of the promises kept, some of the accomplishments that the government has been able to achieve in the last 2 years?
Well, I think the first one that I am very proud of, and I think our government is extremely proud of, and that the Vietnamese community benefit, as do others, is the Canada Child Benefit.
Okay.
That was introduced throughout Canada. That is a non-taxable sum of money that goes into every household. As an example, in Humber River, Black Creek, there's $124 million has gone into
Wow.
Humber River, Black Creek alone between last June to this year. So in a 12-month period of time, and that's just in my riding.
Okay.
Yes, I have a lot of Vietnamese, which I'm blessed and happy to have, but it's a huge help to many families.
Yes.
And that is very significant, and I think it's a real trademark of our Prime Minister, who believes very much in equality and wanting to make sure that people get the assistance they need. Trying to get everybody into that middle class area, and to see that the middle class of Canada gets some real benefits. Well, the Canada Child Benefit is a huge help to the families when it comes to whether it's just basic clothing and putting additional food into the cupboard, or it's the dance lessons or piano lessons.
Right.
It's a little bit of extra money, and on average it's $8,000 extra a month.
Right.
And so it's X amount per child, and Vietnamese have lots of children as well as other communities.
Yes.
And I'm sure it's a big help to the Vietnamese in particular. Okay. Another significant issue, of course, of importance to the Vietnamese community is the fact that we now have a national housing strategy.
Yeah, I was going to get to that.
It's very important to us. We almost had one done when we were in government before, and it collapsed with the government. Mm-hmm. So getting an agreement on building affordable housing, being able to give people mobility, those that get a subsidy today can move around with that ability, with that subsidy.
Yes.
They won't be forced to stay in one particular area that they didn't like, but they have a subsidy and they can find themselves somewhere else to live and transfer that subsidy over there. So we're looking at how can we increase the affordability issue, because there's so many people, lots of them in the Vietnamese community,
yes.
lots in my own riding as an example, that would like to have better housing, safer housing. And we're hoping that with the 100,000 new units that are going to be built in the next few years, that many of those will be for the Vietnamese community. Yeah. Seniors housing is another, we have a real lack of that.
Yes.
So that's another part of when we talk about the affordable housing agenda. So our commitment, along with the province of Ontario and the other provinces, to build more affordable housing, I think will be an enormous benefit to all of your viewers in the Vietnamese community.
Do you find that it's a much bigger issue in the GTA where both you and I reside with the housing issue because of the affordability, the issues of affordability. Like if you drive around, Toronto, I don't think you can get a single detached house for anything less than 1.5 million. So it goes to my next question for the youth. Those kids coming out, 22 years old, he's got a decent job, he's got a little bit of student debt. And, most of the time he's staying at his mom and dad's house still, whereas, in past years, they're going out, they're buying their own places. So how is the government going to address issues for the young people in terms of student debt, huge student debt, and affordability for housing and mortgage and stuff like that?
Well, when we're talking about housing, we're talking about all kinds of housing for all kinds of people. Right. Whether we're talking about student housing or seniors housing, it's a full spectrum of different forms of housing. One of the things, though, I need to mention is, of course, here in Ontario, the province is going to make sure that students don't have all that student debt by providing free tuition for those who qualify, so that there should be no reason our young people coming out of high school can't afford to get a good education, and should not have to be ending up with $20,000 and $30,000, as my own kids did, with $30,000 in debt, and then
which is nothing nowadays.
No, it probably isn't. And then say, okay, now where am I going to find a job?
Correct.
So the fact that our unemployment is down to just over 5%, which is the first time in umpteen years that we've had such a low unemployment rate.
Right.
And I think that has a lot to do with the way that we are investing money in job creation and providing those opportunities. Many of the Vietnamese in particular are very much into the IT field. Yesterday there was an announcement of another $100 million going out for small startups and so on that are there. So we're putting a lot of money into the technology areas to bring opportunities for many of our young people that are looking for a solid job and a future. Correct. And so a lot of focus is on young people. Canada Summer Jobs as an example. We've doubled the amount of money that was going into the Canada Summer Jobs before, providing that career opportunities. So right now it may be a 12 or 16 week opportunity. What needs to happen is they need to have that at least as a 6-month job, so they can really start to get some experience. Because it prevents so many young people from getting into the job market. So we're well aware of those challenges, and I think our Prime Minister is very much up to meeting those challenges for many.
One of the issues that is very important in our community also is nursing in retirement homes. There is a group right now that is trying to get, I'm sure you're aware of it, of an old age home, right? So the disadvantage with a lot of the Vietnamese seniors is that they don't speak English very well, so they feel very lost if they were to go to a non-Vietnamese retirement home. Secondly, the older Vietnamese generation tend to have less money than the younger generation, and as you know, nursing homes, they're like diamonds in the rough, and it's really hard to get in, right? So how would the government address these issues in the future especially an aging population, not just within the Vietnamese community, but the wider community itself? How would you say Prime Minister Trudeau and your government would address these issues in the future?
Well, the question becomes also one of a partnership with the provinces, whether it's Ontario or else throughout Canada. A lot of nursing beds, retirement homes very much fall under the jurisdiction of the province. Hence the relationship, and why the relationship between the federal government and the provincial government is so important. Because if you were going to create opportunities for a Vietnamese nursing home, because clearly I've always been extremely sympathetic to the language issue.
Yes.
It has to be extremely difficult, and it's in my opinion, it's just not acceptable to have to go into an English-speaking nursing home when you barely speak the language, understand, and then there's the food challenges. I was on the board of Villa Colombo at one point, and again, it was very focused because it was Italian food, Italian language spoken. People felt very comfortable there. And I always thought that should be the example for many other ethnic communities. I mean, it doesn't have to be for everybody. But at least we should have for this next generation, for this 20 years that we're going through now, it would be nice if the Vietnamese community had their own retirement or nursing home.
Exactly.
That would help. It'll never be enough to accommodate everybody, but at least for those who had the good fortune of being able to go into a nursing home in that situation, it would feel much more like home and be easier for them as they age.
Yes.
Again, that could everything could happen. It needs money, it needs commitment, but it needs partnerships.
Right.
And I think you would find very much that with our national housing strategy, we're talking about all kinds of housing needs.
Right.
That's another housing needs. Do it in partnership with the province of Ontario.
Yeah.
And hopefully that we would see that materialize. I think it would be a wonderful accomplishment for the community. That, and maybe it's time you had your own cultural center.
Well, we can always discuss that. I have just a couple of more questions before we end this segment. So one of the questions, this is going to be a little bit of a tough one. As you know, there's been a little bit of a pushback on the government's small business proposal, right?
Yes.
And there has been a lot of protests at some of the, I guess, town hall meetings with some of the ministers and some of the MPs. Can you maybe clarify some of the misconceptions, myths, or truths out there about the small business issue right now that's in the news?
Well, I think the most important thing is that the taxes are currently 11% for our small businesses. They're going to be reduced to 10.5% next year, and they're going
This
to be...
is the corporate tax, right?
Yes.
Okay. Corporate
and
tax.
And in the 2019, they're going to be reduced to 9%.
Okay.
That's a 2% reduction in what our small businesses are paying in taxes today, which is a significant reduction overall. I think by the end, you add it up at the end of the year. And part of that is so that we can encourage people to put more money back into their businesses, to hire more people.
Right.
The other avenues as we move forward, there's a lot of myths out there, and I would suggest that you should get the actual facts. This is still a work in transition.
Sure.
We've had a lot of consultation done. Minister Morneau has been out there listening, as we all have. There were a lot of changes from what was first announced as a result of the consultations. This is what a democracy means. You have meetings, people come out and say, I disagree with this policy or that policy. And a government's role is to listen. Correct. Some they will change and some they don't. But the changes that are moving forward are a direct result of the consultations that Minister Morneau has done. Another big issue for businesses is the issue of what they call income sprinkling. Yes, which means, you know, I have a small business and then I put my 2 daughters and my son and my wife on my payroll. They actually contribute absolutely nothing or very little. What the government is trying to address is, again, something that would be of particular importance to the Vietnamese community as others, is fair, is making the system fair for everybody. Right. So asking those that are very rich, which is a 1% more than what they're previously paying, so it's not a whole lot of money for a whole lot of rich people. But we want the rich people to continue to do well because they pay a lot of the taxes on behalf of all of us. But at the same time, the Prime Minister is committed to making sure that we have a fair tax system, and feels that our tax system currently isn't, and that we need to do some adjustments to better help those in the middle class that are currently there and those that want to join it. Right. So dealing with a variety of changes to things like income sprinkling, as they call it, will add more revenue to the government's coffers so that we can turn around and invest in our national housing strategy, in healthcare system, and so on, and make life better for everyone. It's a very difficult role he has when you try to make tax changes. Correct. Someone's going to get hurt no matter what, and the idea here is to make it fair for everybody. Okay. Another question I have is, you work a lot with the Vietnamese community, right? In my experience, a lot of the younger people, they're very indifferent, apathetic. Yes. They don't vote. So being in, I think you were first elected to member of parliament in 1999, so it's almost been 20 years. How would you encourage the young, I really want to emphasize the young people, to get involved
like, it's not just going to the voting booth, you know, every 4 years or every 5 years. What would be some of your sage words to get them involved in civic activities and to get out there? How would you recommend it?
This is their country now.
Sure.
And I know they love it, and they're quick to say that, but they are like so many other of our young people. They're just lazy, apathetic, and say, well, you know, nobody's going to listen to me anyway. But I have to say, within the Vietnamese community, you know, you have a couple of organizations that are just full of very energetic young people.
Yes.
I don't think there's one old person in that group that I'm thinking of. And they're full of energy and are very anxious to make life better for the Vietnamese community, but even for themselves. And so you can be very proud of your young people as well, because they are Canada's future.
We want them to do more, though.
Yes, no, we want them to do more, but one, they need to vote, but they need to do more than vote. Living in a country and being respectful is not enough.
Correct.
You need to participate. And the more people that participate in democracy in Canada, the stronger our democracy would be. And the better for them as well, because it's their future. As we talk, it's not necessarily mine or yours.
Correct.
It's all about theirs.
Yeah.
And for that reason, they need to get involved.
Well, I have one last question. You're very well known in the Vietnamese community, especially in the GTA. What would you say is the most rewarding experiences you've ever had with the Vietnamese community? Was there a particular event or festival or something that you can recall in your last 19 or 20 years that you've dealt with the Vietnamese that was very rewarding for you?
Well, something that I go to every year is the Freedom Flag recognition.
Sure.
With the veterans.
Yes.
And I always find that I don't think I've missed it for the last 15 or 16 years. I always find that event so moving. And looking at the faces of the veterans and knowing what they've gone through in their life to be where they are today. It's a reminder of the, 20 years ago and all of the challenges facing. But that's one part of the many things I do. Being with them, it's very colorful when they have all of their different celebrations, whether it's New Year's and the Lunar Festival and so on. They're kind, caring people.
Yes.
And I'm blessed to have the opportunity to represent them for such a long time.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Ms. Grove, for this edition of Political Talk with James Nguyen. I know that you just flew in this morning and taking the time to come with us. So stay tuned for our next edition of Political Talk with James Nguyen. I will be interviewing the potential next Premier of Ontario, Leader Patrick Brown of the Conservative Party of Ontario. Thank you once again, Ms.
Very welcome. Thank you, James.